All right, let's dive right in. We're going to talk about a huge, game-changing idea from one of the godfathers of economics, Adam Smith. And what's wild is that this idea from way back in 1776 explains something super fundamental about your life right now, specifically why your job even exists. It's kind of like a secret to prosperity, and we're going to unravel it together. So let's kick things off with a question. I mean, just think about it for a second. Why can someone today have a job as a professional dog walker or a podcast editor? These are real jobs. 250 years ago, that would have sounded like science fiction. Back then, pretty much everyone was a farmer. So what on earth happened? What changed to create this explosion of all these different specialized jobs? Well, the answer is hiding in that secret from Adam Smith. Okay, so the big idea here is something we'll call the specialization rule. And it's actually super simple, but it's also incredibly powerful. It basically says that for a whole society to get wealthier, people need to stop trying to do everything themselves. Instead, you gotta focus on doing just one thing and get really, really good at it. Now, the fancy official term for this is the division of labor. I know it sounds a little textbooky, but don't worry. All it means is breaking a big, complicated job down into a bunch of tiny, simple tasks. So think about it. Instead of one person trying to build an entire car from scratch, which would be insane, you have one person whose only job is to put on the wheels, and another person who just paints the doors. That's it. And this specialization, this focus, well, you're about to see how it becomes the engine that drives all economic progress. And this brings us to the quote. Seriously, this one sentence from Adam Smith is the key to this whole thing. He wrote, "The division of labor is limited by the extent of the market." So what does that actually mean? It's simple, really. He's saying that your ability to have a super specialized job, to only be a baker or only be a carpenter, it completely depends on how big your market is. You can only have that one cool job if there are enough people out there willing to pay you for it. So, to really hammer this point home, no pun intended, Adam Smith gives us this perfect little story. Let's call it the Lonely Nailer's Problem. It's a tale that shows exactly what happens when you've got amazing skills, but your market is just, well, it's way too small. Okay, to get this, Smith wants you to picture two completely different places. First, imagine you're in the remote Scottish Highlands back in his day. You're in a tiny, isolated village. Here, a farmer can't just be a farmer. Nope, he's also his own butcher, his own baker, and his own brewer. A carpenter can't just specialize in, say, beautiful cabinets. He has to do every single job that involves wood. You're forced to be a jack of all trades because there just aren't enough people to support a full-time specialist. Now contrast that with a big city, a great town. There, a guy whose only job is to carry stuff around, a porter, can make a decent living. Why? Because there's always someone who needs something moved. So let's meet our guy, the nailer. Picture a craftsman who has spent his entire life mastering one single skill, making nails. And because he's so specialized, he's gotten crazy good at it. He can hammer out something like 1,000 nails in a single day. Do the math. Over a year, that's a mind-blowing 300,000 nails. I mean, that is just an incredible level of productivity. But, and this is the huge but, here's the problem. He's stuck in that tiny, isolated village. How many of those nails do you think he can actually sell to his neighbors? Smith figured he'd be lucky to sell maybe 1,000 nails in an entire year. 1,000. That's less than what he can make in a single day. So here's the devastating point. All that skill, all that incredible efficiency from specializing, it's completely useless. His talent is wasted because his market is just too small. He can't make a living as a nail specialist. He's forced to go back to being a general handyman, maybe even do some farming on the side just to survive. Okay, so if the problem is a small market, then the solution has to be making the market bigger, right? But how in the world do you do that back in the 1700s? Well, for Adam Smith, the answer was a kind of technological revolution. It was the thing that could connect our lonely nailer to millions of potential customers. And that thing was water carriage. Just look at these numbers. This is what it took to move 200 tons of stuff from London to Edinburgh back then. If you went by land, you needed 50 wagons, 100 men, and 400 horses. Can you imagine the cost? It would be absolutely insane. Now, what if you went by sea? To move that exact same 200 tons, you needed one ship and maybe 6 to 8 sailors. That's it. The difference is just staggering. And what does this mean? Suddenly, our nailer isn't just stuck selling to his little village. He can now afford to ship his nails to every town on the coast of Britain. His market didn't just grow, it exploded. And Smith really drives this home with a killer question. He asks, what goods could bear the expense of land carriage between London and Calcutta? Think about that. Without cheap transport, like ships, what could you possibly afford to send on a journey that long? The answer is almost nothing. Maybe some spices or silks, the most expensive luxury goods imaginable, but everyday stuff, forget it. Long-distance trade, the very thing that builds giant markets and makes everyone richer, it would be totally impossible. For Smith, water transport was the key that unlocks the whole world. But Smith doesn't just stop with one craftsman. He takes this idea and scales it way, way up. He argues that this one simple rule didn't just decide whether a guy could be a nailer, it decided the fate of entire civilizations. For him, geography, and specifically your access to water, was pretty much economic destiny. So think about it. Where did the first great, wealthy civilizations pop up? Smith noticed a very clear pattern. They all emerged around the coasts of the Mediterranean Sea. They grew along the banks of the Nile River in ancient Egypt. They flourished along the Ganges River in Bengal, and around the massive river networks in eastern China. So what's the common link here? What connects all these places? It's not their climate, it's not their culture, it's not one specific group of people. So what was it? What did every single one of these regions have that gave them such a massive head start, letting them prosper while other places didn't? And the answer is so simple, it's brilliant. They all had access to massive, navigable waterways. These rivers and seas were basically the natural highways of the ancient world. They were transportation networks that connected these small communities to a much, much bigger market. They could trade easily with their neighbors and over time with basically the whole known world. And that access, that connection to a giant market is what let them specialize, innovate, and get rich. The contrast Smith points out is just really stark. He says to look at the inland parts of Africa or Asia, places far from the sea with rivers that you couldn't really travel on. For centuries, he says, they were cut off. They were isolated. Their markets were tiny, just like our nailer's little village. And when you have a tiny market, there's no reason to specialize, there's no division of labor. And so there's very little progress. He uses the language of his time, saying they remained in a barbarous and uncivilized state. Not because of the people, but simply because their geography cut them off from the wider world and its markets. So this all brings us right back to where we started, to today. Adam Smith's logic is crystal clear. Prosperity comes from specialization, but specialization can only happen if you have a big enough market. And for most of human history, the size of your market was decided by your physical geography. Were you near a river? Were you near a coast? But that leaves us with one last big question. If you think about it, rivers and seas were the original internet, right? They were the networks that connected people and markets and created wealth. So what does that mean for us today? What new geographies are being created right now, not by water, but by technology? What new markets are opening up, and what totally new specialized jobs are they going to create next?